Hello and welcome back to the channel. Now this is a special video where I've edited together all of the videos from the new tab Chrome extension series that I created into one single video, which is basically a full free course. So in this video we'll be building a new tab Chrome extension that connects up to Firebase so you can have all of your notes appear in one place. So it's really easy to do. You can follow along in the video now. And if you've got any questions, leave a comment below. You can get the code from this extension as well by clicking the link in the description. It's completely free, but if you want, you can donate from that link as well. So anyway, I hope you find this free course helpful in getting started to build Chrome extensions. So here you can see on my screen, this is the extension that we're going to be creating so far. So we have a title, we have our sort of area we can add our note just here. We can change the emoji that the note will have. So if you see, if I change this and save, it'll update over here. I can click on my different notes, and if I open a new tab, it will stay on whatever note I was working on before. So if I make changes and save and then create a new tab, you can see that these changes are kept. Now this all works using a Chrome extension and a database. So the database that we use is from Firebase. So I'll just show you now a quick overview of the sort of files that we need for this. So I'm using Atom for this extension. So for the manifest, it's quite straightforward. So down here we use this Chrome URL override. So this basically means we're replacing one of the Chrome pages with our own content. So in this example here, it's the new tab, and we just pass through the location in our folder of our extension. So this is the new tab.html. So it means if we go to a new tab, it will load this page instead. Up here we just have our name, our version, our description. This is all sort of standard stuff. And then we have a background.html page as well. This is important. This is where we make our connection to Firebase. So if you've seen any of my previous videos on how to use Firebase within a Chrome extension, you'll have a good idea of this already. But I'll go over how you can connect that all again as well. But that's what the background page is for. And the same thing down here with the content security policy. This is to make sure that our extension has permissions to make calls to the Firebase URL and to the Firebase database, so it can send data to and from our database. So this is what the background HTML page will do. It's quite straightforward. So it just connects the information that we need for our Firebase connection, so our database, and then we just call this Firebase JavaScript file just here. So in the first part of the series, we're going to just be making the display of our extension. So this will be how to create notes, how to send them to the database, how to save them, how to delete them. And then in the next part, we'll look into how we can actually add authorization as well, so we can create different users. And then if you actually wanted to publish this on the Chrome store, that'll be an important step, because otherwise you would have lots of different people using and seeing the same notes. So we'll need to add in security and user information. So we'll add that towards the end, but for the first part, we just want to make it so we get to a similar page as what we have right here. So you can have, every time you open a new tab, you can change them and delete them and create new notes. So for here, just click new note, set an emoji up here, set the information for my note and click save. Then you can see that's added down here. And if I go to a new tab, that's kept. So that's what we're going to be building first. So in this video, we're just going to be creating the Firebase app. So if you go to firebase.google.com and click on Add New Project, and just log in with your Google account, it will ask us to enter a name for our project. So I'll just paste this in. So I'm going to call it New Tab Notes, and then click Continue. It will ask if you want to have analytics. I'm not going to use this, but you can if you want. Then just click Create Project, and that will create everything we need for our project. Okay, so once that's done, just click Continue. And then all we need to do next is click on this icon just here that says Web, because we need to get the API information for our extension. So we just paste in again our name here. We don't need to add Firebase hosting just yet. But if you wanted to add a website for your extension, you could do that there as well. But all we need to do is register our app and then get the SDK information. So we'll just connect this just here, and then make sure to take a note of this. So just copy this SDK information and put it into a file somewhere, just so you have this for later on in the series. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it in a new window, a new tab on Atom. So I've got that just here. So make sure you've got that saved somewhere. And then all you need to do is click continue to the console. And then we're just going to go across to our database. So I'll first show an example using the real-time database. And then at the end, I'll show you how you can do this with Firestore as well. So you just need to scroll down here to the real-time database and click create database. And to begin with, we're just going to say start in test mode, which means that anyone can read and write information, don't have to be a logged in user. But later on, again, we'll go through and make sure that we add these extra security settings as well. But whilst we're just getting the first part up and running, and whilst you're only using it on your computer, it's fine to use the test mode. So just click start in test mode and then click enable. Okay, and then you're all set up. Going to add a number of files in here. So the first one will be my manifest file. So that's just manifest.json. And then we need another file. This will be app.js. And then firebase.js. And then we will need background.html. And then finally, we need the actual new tab page. So we'll call this new tab.html. Okay, so these are all the files that we actually need. So the first one we're going to change is our manifest file. So let's open that up and close all of the other ones. So just close all of these, and the manifest file is what we need. So everything in the Chrome extension is inside a object in JavaScript. So we just open up our curly brackets like this. We can just add in our different parameters. So the first one is name. So this is just the name of your extension. So I'm just going to call mine new tab notes, and then you put a comma, and then version. This is the first version, so I'll just put 0.01, but again, you can put whatever you need. Then description, notes when you open a new tab, anything that you need. And next we need to put background. So the way that we make connections to Firebase is through our background page. Now this is how you can actually process extra external JavaScript files. So I'll explain that when we get to that point. But for now, you just need to add a background object just here. And then inside here, we're going to say page. This is the location of our background page. And that is the background.html over here. So you just put it in like that. And then we just need to say persistent is false. So it's not constantly running, it's only going to run when we call it. So next we need to say Chrome URL overrides. This is where we can overwrite the new tab HTML. So there's a number of different types of overrides you can make, but for this example we're going to be using the new tab. So we just put overrides, just make sure I spell it right, overrides, there we go. So again, add a new object like we did before, and in here we just say new tab. So this is the name of the Chrome page you want to replace. So in this example, it's just new tab, and then we just, as we did up here with the background.html, we pass in the location of our page. So there we have it, new tab. And then down here, we're just going to say manifest version. I'm using version 2, so it's probably the same for you as well. And then the last thing we need to put is the extra security options because we're making external calls to Firebase. So this is just called content security policy. And then it's quite a long string just here, so I'll put it in the description so you can copy this. Okay, so now that we've added our content security policy, it should look like this. So we're just going to click save or Command S, and that is our manifest file created. So what we can do now is go ahead and actually add this into Chrome. Now it won't do anything at the moment because our new tab page is empty, but it should display a message if this is the actual data we want to show in this. So to begin with, we need to go over to Chrome. And then depending on which version of Chrome you're using, you just click this extension icon just here, and then you want to click on Manage Extensions. And then up here you can see I've searched for my extension as I haven't loaded it in yet. Make sure you click on Developer Mode, and then all you need to do is click Load Unpacked Extension, and then find the folder that you created where we added those files a moment ago. So I'm just going to click this now and find my folder. Okay, so I've selected my page. You can see that it's got all of the details we created. There's the title, there's the version number, there's the description. If you click on details, you can find out more information as well, such as the background page and the information that we've asked for. So we didn't add any extra permissions. So this is everything that we need so far. So that is our extension files created and added into Chrome. So if we open a new tab now, you can see it's saying, is this the new tab that you're expecting? Because we've just changed what this is. So the first time that you open this up, it will have this message. So all you need to do is say keep changes. And now you can see we have this blank page open, which is great. This is what we need. So this means everything's now connected. Okay, so now we're going to go over to our new tab page and quickly put in the basic HTML that we want to display the contents of our new tab. So to begin with, we're going to create a new HTML page. So we're just going to use the standard HTML5 doc type. Start the page as you normally would. So HTML, open and close. We want a header, open and close, body, open and close. Just space that down a little bit. We'll put in a title. You can change any of these parts if you want. And then we're going to add a block up here for some styling, but we're not going to put this in just yet. We can move this into an external CSS file as well if you want, but to begin with, we'll just put it in here. We need to set the meta type. So because we're going to be using emojis, we need to make sure that we have the correct meta data set up at the top here, just like this. And that is everything that we need so far for the head part of our page. And then in the body, we want to set the display for our page. So we just need to put a div here at the top with a class of main or anything that you want there. This is going to be the main sort of area of our page. And then inside this, we're going to have a sidebar. I'll just use a side for this. I'll give it a class of sidebar. This will be the left-hand side. So make sure you spell it correctly like that. And then we want to have an icon appear at the top of the page. So we just call this class icon. And then put in an emoji of your choice. So I'm just going to find a random emoji here, and this will essentially be the logo of our extension. So I use this pen icon just here. And then just close off that div. And then we can just put in a title for our page. So we just call it new tab notes. So we've got new tab notes. And then we want to add in a button for people to be able to create new notes. So we'll just put again a new div, class new note. And then to begin with, we'll just put in the words new note and maybe just an emoji over here, like a plus icon or something like that. There we go, like this one. There we go, so we'll just put a space between those two items. And then underneath this, we're just going to put a new div again called pages holder. And this will be where all of our different pages of notes will be added in later on. So we've just got this area just here. So that's everything that we want to display in our sidebar for now. Now we need to add our main area. So we're going to create a new section with a class of holder. And then inside here is where we're going to have the actual content of our note. So as you can see from this example, we need to have our top part here where we have our emoji, then our title, and then the body of our note. So that's what we're going to be creating next. So we'll go over to our atom again, inside our section. So we've got div class icon. This will be the icon emoji for this particular note that we have opened up. And then we're going to put a space here for our action buttons. So this will be to save or delete a note. So we'll just make a note here to put these in soon. So again, we'll add them in later on. So now we just need to make sure that we have a title for our page. So this will be our note title. And then all we need next is the area for the body of our note. So we call this post body. So this will be the content of the note. So let's save this now and have a look at our extension. So we go to a new tab, we can see we have this information displayed now, which is slowly getting there, but we need to add a little bit of styling to make this look the way we want. So I'll add a link in the description to a to GitHub with all of the CSS if you don't want to follow through with this part, but otherwise I'll quickly run through the CSS that I want to add here. So we'll start with styling the overall page. So we'll put HTML and body. We want to set a height of 100% just so that our sidebar spans the entire width of the page. We want to make sure it's 100% of the width as well. Remove all margins, remove all padding, and then set a font size of 100%. So that's our top part of our page. Then we want to style our headers. So we'll choose a font family here, something that's nice and nice to read. So you can see we have this nice readable font here for the headers. So this font is actually called Playfair Display. So this is from Google Fonts, so we need to add this at the top, but I'll show you how to do that in a moment. And then we're just going to add a couple of fallbacks for other nice readable fonts. And all we need to do next is set a nice font weight. So something around 900. So that's our header. Then for our body, we want to set a background color. So I found these colors on Tailwind. I'll put a link in the description to where you can find more information about Tailwind, but for now the color, I've just got it copied over here. And then for the text color, so that is the background color of our page. So if we go over to our new tab again and refresh, we can see we have this display here. We're going to add a light mode and a dark mode so that we can have that support straight away. So that's our background, and then for our dark mode, it will be body, dark. So the color is what we used as our background color, and our font color becomes our background color, just like that. So if we were to put in class dark and refresh, you can see we have dark mode support already. But what we can do at some point is add a button or look at the time of the user and then automatically switch which mode that we're using. But for now, let's just leave it empty and carry on adding our styling. So our div main, so the whole container is going to be using a display type of flex, and also make sure that it's 100% for height as well. So if we have a look over here now, we can see that they are appearing side by side, which is what we want. And then for our sidebar, we need to make sure we set a maximum width of 300. Set a background color for here as well. So I've got EDF, again I found this on Tailwind, to F7. A height of 100%, padding of 25 pixels, and then we want to set a dark mode for our sidebar as well. And again, if you want to change any of the colors and styling, feel free to do so. So this is 718096 from Tailwind. So if we have a look at this now, we can see we have this slight difference just here, and then for the dark mode, it looks like this. So it's a smooth change just in the background color there. But again, let's go back and carry on adding our styling. So for the main area of our page, we want to make sure that we fill the entire width available. So because this is a Chrome extension, we can use CSS that normally wouldn't be supported across the entire web, but because we know it's just on Chrome, we can use Chrome specific CSS attributes. So to begin with here, we're going to be using WebKit fill available. So that makes sure that our main area here goes across the entire width of the page. And then we want to do the same with the height as well, make sure it's filling up the entire page, and add 25 pixel padding as well, just to space it out a little bit. So there we have this part so far. Next is our div icon. So we'll put a height of 30 pixels, a width of 30 pixels, a line height of 30 pixels, and a font size of 28 pixels. So that just adjusts our logo just here. And then we want to make sure that if they hover over the icon that we have over here, that it makes sure that it is clickable. So to do that, you just say cursor is pointer. So that's all we need to do to make sure we can test that, is just add an emoji over here. So I'm going to use this paper emoji and then save. And if we refresh, you can see there that there's a pointer style above that one, but this one's just normal. This is all the CSS we need so far. So at the moment you can see that these elements aren't too easy to interact with. But in the next video we're going to be making it so that we can change the text that we're entering just here using an attribute called content editable. And then we're going to make sure that when these are focused, that the CSS, the default CSS isn't being used, so we can change that border that's added around the element. But just before the end of this video, we need to make sure that the JavaScript file that we're using is added onto our page as well. So at the bottom of our new tab.html, just before the end of the body tag just here, we're going to say script source app.js like this. And then in app.js, we're just going to put in alert test just to see that everything's connected properly. So if we refresh now, we should see this alert. That's great. So what we need to do next is add in our emoji picker. So to do this, you need to go to emoji-button.js.org. So this address just here, and this will load up the library that we're going to use. And then all we need to do is scroll down here to where we have this CDN URL. And because we're using a Chrome extension, we need to make sure that all of the resources that we're going to be using are contained within the actual JavaScript files. So you just need to select all of this or use Command A, then copy, and then add this to our JavaScript file. So this will be right at the bottom of the page. So that's pasted in down here now. And then underneath this, we need to add a event listener to see when the actual page has loaded. So you do this by saying window add event listener, DOM content loaded. And then you want to put a comma just here because we're calling a function straight away. And then open that just here. So this function will run once the Chrome extension has completely loaded. So inside here, we're going to set two variables. One is button, and this will be equal to our icon. So that'll be query selector. That'll be holder icon. Just make sure there's a dot in front of both of those. So we're using the class names. And then the other one will be the picker, and that's going to be new emoji button. So that uses this library that we just installed. And then we just need to add a listener for each of these events. So when the button is clicked and when the picker is used. So once they've actually clicked on one of the emojis. So we'll set the button first. We'll say button add event listener for click. Then call this function. And then here we can make actions when this event is called. So we're just going to say picker, toggle picker, button. So essentially open the picker. This is the element that they clicked. And then after this, we need to say picker on emoji. So when an emoji has been selected, we're going to take which emoji that was. So this will be the emoji they've selected. And then we'll have a callback here as well. And we just want to say button inner text. So change the actual emoji that is shown on the button to be a new emoji. So if we save this now, just check that we've removed the alert at the top of the page. Yep, I've removed the alert. So up here we'll have the rest of our file. Now just go to our extension and refresh. And if we try and click on this icon now, you can see it opens this emoji selector, and if we click on them, it replaces the chosen emoji with what we've selected. Video after this, but in this video we're going to make it so we can edit these elements here and send this to our background page. So to get started, we'll go into our code editor, and everything will be where we continued off in the last video. So here is our new tab.html. So the first thing we need to do is use something called the content editable attribute, and that basically allows the user to click onto the area, so for example this one here, and then start changing the text. So we'll add that in now, and I'll show exactly what that does. So just down here where we have the title, we're going to put content editable is true, and then the same thing down here for the post body, content editable is true. And if we go over to our extension now and refresh, you can see we can actually select it and make changes. But you'll notice there's this horrible border around the outside. We want to remove that. So to do that, we're going to go into our CSS at the top here. So in our CSS up here, we want to add some square brackets just here, and then type in content editable. And then we want to make sure that we're selecting this when it's focused. So you want to put focus like this, and then just open up your CSS and say outline 0 pixels solid, and for a color we're going to put transparent. So if we save that and go back and refresh, and now select, you can see it looks like it's actually built into the page in a more sort of similar way to Notion. So if you use notes on Notion, you don't get this horrible border around it. You can select and type exactly where we are on the page. So we can also type into here and select these items. So if we were to put my new title, for example, that can go in like this. But what we need to do next is make sure if we remove the content from these areas that we have placeholder text so that the user isn't seeing a blank page. And we also need to make sure that if there is a placeholder there, when we are selecting and starting to type the text, it will disappear. And if we close the text, it will appear again. So as if you're working with an input box, but this is just a, this one's an H1 element. So to do that, we're going to scroll down to our two content editables just here. And we're going to actually add a placeholder attribute with the text that we want to display. So for example, for the title, we could say Untitled. And for the post body down here, we could say write your post here. So if we go back and refresh, you'll see this is just using the actual content of our page. So if we remove these two areas here, so the note title and the content of the note, and then save again. A placeholder attribute is on the page, but it's not being seen or used yet. So to do that, we need to edit our CSS. So we're going to go back up to our CSS block over here. And then underneath our content editable focus, we need to make sure that we use this placeholder attribute that we just created so that it appears and then is hidden depending on what the user is doing. So we'll start by typing in up here like we did with content editable. We'll put placeholder. So this is selecting the element by the attribute that we're using. And then we're going to say empty. So if our element is completely empty, we want to select this. And then we want to say before, so this is going to add content onto the page. We say content attr, so the attribute for placeholder. So that'll be the content that appears in this element. And then we just want to set a color. So for in this example, we probably need just a light, like a light gray color. So let's just put gray for now. Well, for now, we'll just put blue actually, so we can make sure we see what's happening. We want to set an opacity here, so it doesn't look too much of a block color. So obviously with placeholders, they're usually slightly lighter. So just put 0.5, and then we want the cursor to be type of text. So if we refresh and have a look, you can see we have the element appearing here. But the next thing we need to do is make sure when we click onto this box or enter anything, that this disappears. So go back into your CSS again underneath here, and then still we're going to make a new square brackets underneath and target placeholder. We're going to say empty again like we did before, but this time we want to be on a focus element. So it's empty and it's being focused, and then we want to access before, and then we're just going to say content is empty. So if we refresh this now, so save and refresh, there is our placeholder. If we click onto this element and type, or if we have empty text, click onto it and then click away, we can start to actually use these like a normal placeholder. So that's how we can add the placeholder elements here, which is quite a useful way of working, not just in Chrome extensions, but across the web as well. It's a useful trick to have. So before we finish this video, we want to make sure that we can start to send any changes or new pages we want to create to our database. So what we need to do first is, can you find the SDK information that you made when you created your Firebase app? So for me, I saved it to this file just here. So what I need to do is copy just the JavaScript part like this, and we're going to paste that into our firebase.js file over here. So we'll just go to our firebase.js and paste that in, and then take the other two, or it's just one here, take this JavaScript file up here, and we're going to paste that into our background.html page up here. And then we need to access the database as well. So if you just have a look at the link just here, see there's available libraries. If we just copy that and open it up, we need to make sure that we can actually access the database part of the extension. And then later on in the series, we're going to be using the authentication part of this library as well. So just down here you can see there's Firestore, which we'll be using later on, but first we need to use the database, which you can find just here. So again, we want to go to our background.html and paste this underneath. Just make sure that you're using the correct file name just here. So let's just double check. It should be, if we just copy that, paste it here to make sure we're using the same version. Just check that that URL exists. Yep, so that is the path that we want. So we'll get rid of this one underneath. So there is our two scripts to Firebase, and then underneath we need to make sure that we include our firebase.js file in here as well. So to do that, we're just going to say script source firebase.js. So that means our background.html page is now connected. So if we see down here, if we type in console log Firebase and then open up our Chrome app, so here we have our extension here, it's all working correctly, but we've added our background page. So if we go to the extensions settings, find our new tab notes. So here's our new tab notes just here. And all we want to do is click on this inspect views button. If it's not there, if there could be a thing where it says +1, so just press that and then it will appear. And then that will open up the background.html page. So all we want to do is just check in the console just here, and then you can see that your firebase.js is correctly connected and you're all linked up to your Firebase app. So if you haven't got this SDK, just check the first video in the series. I've got a link in the description, and that will explain everything you need to do to create those SDK details. So just before we finish this video, we're going to add a couple of functions into our app.js. So we have our app.js over here, which currently just has our emoji library that we're using. So that's fine, that can stay at the bottom of the page, but up here we're going to add some functions that we're going to be using. So the first one will be to save any changes that we want to make to our notes. This will be just function save page, and this will take in a couple of parameters. So there'll be ID, title, icon, and body. So that'll be all the information that we need for our page. We also need another function, we'll put that above, to fetch notes, and that won't take in any parameters. We also need another function down here to clear a note. So if we want to create a brand new note, this will be what we use just here. And then we also need a function to change the selected note that we want to view. So we're going to call that one change page. And that will just take in the note ID. And then all we need after that is a function that's going to set up all of our event listeners and any clicks we want to listen for. So finally, just before we finish, we'll just make sure we save that page just there. What we want to do is go into our firebase.js page as well and just set up the way that we're going to send messages to and from our extension. Not sure why this is appearing just here. Okay, just remove that. So what we want to use is the Chrome runtime. So that lets us send message events from our extension to our background page and so on. So to do this, you just type in Chrome runtime on message. So because this function here is in our background page, so we link to firebase.js from our background page, this is what we will be sending events to. So this is going to essentially listen to any messages that are sent to us. So that's why we say Chrome runtime on message. Then we just say add listener, so we're listening for events, add listener, and then we want to make sure that we're getting a message object just here, sender, and then our response that we're going to send back. Let me just fix that. So like this, and then this will send back a callback just here. So what we want to be doing just here is listening for the different types of message requests that we're going to be sending through. So it will look something like this. We can say if message command equals, so this could be the name of our response, so it could be post, or it could be create note. This could be anything we're going to put in just here, and then we'll just, inside here, we'll process the request, and then we'll send a callback using the response object just here. So here I am in Atom now, and you can see up here we have the functions we made in the last video. So the first one we're going to do is the fetch notes function. So what we want to start by doing is, in all of these functions where we're collecting or sending data, we need to make a call to our firebase.js file, so our background page. So we'll show how to do that in a moment, but first let's start by actually setting out what we need to do to actually get our notes. So before we start fetching our notes, we need to make sure that we clear any existing notes so that we're not adding duplicate notes. So to do that, we say document query selector, and then we grab the ID of our holder of our different pages. So this is called pages holder. And then all we do is set the inner HTML of this element to be empty. And then after here, we want to send a request to our background page. So we do this by saying Chrome runtime send message. And what this will do is send a command to our background page that will let us perform these actions. So we just say command, as we did in the last video, and we're going to name these. So we'll say fetch notes, that'll be the name of our command. And then the data we want to pass in here will just be an empty object. You don't really even need to put this here. This will just say notes like this, but again, you can leave that empty. And then we want to set our response. So this is where we'll have a callback that when the background page fetches what we need from the database, it will send us a response to this function just here. So we'll just open this up like this. So that'll be where our response for our notes that we have in our database will be sent to. So that means in here, we need to listen for a response. So when we get this data sent in, we're going to say, set a new variable of notes, and this will be equal to response, if I can spell that, response data. So that'll be the data object inside of our response. And then we want to start to build out the display of our notes. So we're going to call this nav. It's a simple navigation. And we'll use a unordered list for this. And to keep things simple, we're going to set a window object or a window variable that will be where our notes will go. So we'll call this notes, and this will just be an array. So we'll set the empty array here. And then all we're going to do is loop through our notes variable just here from our response, and then find all of the different notes that we have. So we just do that by saying for const note ID in notes, like this. So each time we go through our response data and find a new note, we're going to set that as a note ID so that we can use that to actually fetch it, well not fetch it, so we can use that as the click event that we have an actual ID for these elements. So that is our thing just here, and then we're going to basically add each of these into our nav. So when we just say plus equals, it will just add this onto this string. So we'll say li data note ID equals note ID. Very straightforward. And then we want to close that off. Close off the li just here. And then inside of our list item, we're going to add the information for this note. So what we need to do is again add into here and say notes. And then we want to use our note ID again. So use, again, inside here, this is an array. Use our note ID to access the element in the array that we need. And then there is our icon. And then we're going to do the same thing for the title. So again, we'll just add it in and say notes, note ID, title. So that will add everything into our nav. But what we need to do next is make sure that we're adding each of these into our window variable as well. So we've got our notes, note ID equals notes, note ID. So this just means we can access each of our notes outside of the scope of this function. So that when we want to add click events to switch between the different notes, we can do that here rather than creating a separate function. There are slightly better ways to do this at scale and to make it easier. But for now, or to make it more faster if you have lots and lots of notes. But for this example, it'll work completely fine. So that is our function just here. Now we just need to make sure that we tidy up our nav just here by saying to close off our unordered list. And then after all of that, we're just going to say document query selector pages holder inner HTML equals nav. So basically everything there we're doing is first removing the content from that page, sending a request to our background page to fetch all of our notes, setting our variable just here, then creating this nav string, which will go through each of the notes that we found and add it into this string before we finally add that all to the page. Just make sure that we put a dot there because it's a class. So that is almost everything we need for our fetch notes function. We just need to add another function down here, which will be a event listener. So any clicks onto these items will actually be able to be heard. So we're just going to use this function down here. So listen for clicks and run that just here. So that is the first of the functions. So next we're going to actually create a function to listen for clicks. So before we do that, we need to add another window variable at the very top here called first open. So this will be false to begin with. Now this will basically make sure that we're not running certain event listeners more than once. So for things like create new note or delete note, we only want this to be added once, not every time we fetch a new note. Okay, so down here we're going to update our listen for clicks function. So just scroll down a little bit. So what we're essentially doing here is adding event listeners to all of the places on the page that we need them. So the first thing we need to do is set an array of all the list items, so all the notes that we have on the page. So we're going to do this by saying this new LIs, or list items. This will be document query selector. And then this will be any of the sort of unordered list items that we have on the page. We could add pages holder here as well, just to keep things nice and organized. We need to make sure that we actually say query selector all, so that we fetch all of the list items on the page and this then puts them into an array. So then what we need to do is loop through that array. So we just say for. We for loop through all of this, very similar to any loops you've done before. We say I is less than the length of all this increment. Then say, okay, we can use this, say LIs at the one that we've incremented to here. Add event listener on click, run our function just here. So basically, any time that any of the list items or notes have been clicked, it will send us straight into here. So this is where we want to say change page. So in other words, change the note that's currently been selected to be this dataset note ID, which is lowercase. Actually, once you use dataset, all of these are lowercase. So that is going to use that change page function just here, and that's going to take the data or dataset and then note ID attribute from up here. So this is essentially this object or this element here. So when you click on it, you can still access it and then change the page. So that is the first part of our listen for clicks function. After that, we need to add a separate part underneath that will only be run once. So that's why we needed the first open variable set. So we're going to say window if window first open is false, we need to run this code down here. What we want to do first is make sure that we are saying that it is true. So this is only going to run in here. All this code underneath is going to be run once. So we're going to put this inside a try block just in case anything breaks and so it doesn't break the whole page. We'll just console log this error as well so we can see it. This just catches any errors that we might not have found. So then we're going to say var open note. This just will make sure that if we can retain the current note that you've been selected, if you go off and then come on to your page again, or if you create a new tab, it will remember which one you were on last. So all we need to say is local storage get item notes last open page. Now I'll explain more about what this does later on, probably in the next video, but this essentially will open to the last note that we were on if we open a new tab. So we need, down here we're just making sure that the open note isn't empty, and if it is, we just say document query selector. So in our unordered list, then list item, they want to access the data, note ID, and then use the actual variable just here, so the open note. And then all we want to say after we found this element is click. So let's just check that's all in there correctly. Yep. So that is all we need to have for our listen for clicks function. So if we save that, what you'll find at the moment is because we don't have any notes in our database, this won't pull anything in. So let's jump into our database and just add a couple of example notes. So what I have in my database here, so as you can see at the moment my database is completely empty. So if I just add a new object on here called notes and then open it up, this will be our note ID, and then underneath here we just need a couple of attributes. So it's icon, this is where we have our emoji, so if we just select any type of emoji for now, and then title, our first note, and then all we need after that we just type in body, and then this is where we have the main area of text for our note. So if we add this and then open our extension, what we would find is this should begin to fetch our note. Let's just check if we have any errors here. Unexpected string, line 12. Okay, so what we're missing just here, you see this note ID, just need to add a plus just here. Should hopefully remove this error. Yep, so all we need to do is add the corresponding fetch notes command into our background page, and then we should start to see these notes appear here. So let's jump into our firebase.js file now. So then down here we have the code that we left it with previously. So we're saying if command equals, we've just got ... So we want to change this to fetch notes. I think that's what we called it. If we just check in here. Yep, so as long as this is the same, so fetch notes. So this is where we want to put in all of the code to fetch our notes from the database. So all we have to put into here is we're going to use Firebase just here. So we say Firebase, let's make sure that's indented correctly, Firebase database ref is /notes, as we saw when we put it into our database. Then we just say once value, then, so only run this once. They want to set it into a function called snapshot, and then there's our response just here. So then all we need to do is use our response object, which we mentioned when we were writing our call to use fetch notes, and then we're just going to say type result. You can tweak this up a little bit, but I think this is the best way to send these responses, just so you know exactly what is happening. Success, and then all we need to do here is put our data, and this would just be snapshot, so just here, and then val for value. And then we're going to pass through the request that was sent to us as well, which can help a lot for debugging. So there we have it. That should be our fetch notes function. So if we reload our extension now, that's true. We're not actually running this function yet. So if we look in our app.js, we can see just down here, underneath here, we just need to call this function. Otherwise, it won't actually be called on the page. So one thing you need to do as well is make sure that down here you say return true. Now this just makes sure that we keep our port open. So what you'll see down here is we had this thing which said the message port closed before a response was received. But if we refresh now, okay, I just need to fix that. So as you can see, just here we have node ID, not note ID, and here as well. Okay, anywhere we've put note ID, we just need to change to say note. There we go. So now that that's working, you can see we have our element here and it's updating down the side. So next, we just need to make sure we have click events so that when these items are clicked, that our change page function actually does something. So at the moment, you can see when we click on our note down here, we're calling our change page just here. So if we add a callback just here, or a bit of code just here to say note ID, and then refresh. Okay, so you need to make sure that this listen for clicks up here happens inside this area just here, because otherwise it will run before we actually hear the response from our send message. So if we go back now and reload our code, we can see that when we click on our notes, it's appearing down here, which is using our change page. Next thing we need to work on is this change page functions. When we click on our notes over here, it fills up the content of our page with our note. We're also going to be making this new note button here, create a new note onto our page, and we'll be adding buttons over in the corner to delete our note as well. So let's jump straight into it and start working on these new changes. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is update a little bit of our CSS. So as we can see over here, we have this blue text here, which isn't quite what we want. So let's just make sure this is flexible to work whether we have light mode or dark mode. And later on in the video, I'll show you a little bit of code you can use so that you use the actual system default. So if they've already got dark mode on their computer, it will take that by default and vice versa. So first, let's go and change these bits of code. So down here where we have our CSS, we're looking for this placeholder empty before part of it just here. And we're going to change this from blue to inherit. So if we save that now and refresh, we can see that this is adjusting. So there it is in light mode. And if we switch it to use dark mode, we can see that it works for both types. So that's great. So let's go back to our code here. So we're going to scroll down, and first we need to add in some buttons for our save and delete actions, so we can use these later. Then this will be all of the actual part of our HTML complete. So down here where we have our to do to add our action buttons, just underneath this icon here, we want to replace this area here with two buttons. So the first one will be save, and the second one will say delete. And we're just going to add a class here of save page, and on delete, it will be delete page. These will both be hidden to begin with. So if we go back and refresh now, we can see that these buttons are over here, but our new class there that says hidden will make sure that if we're on a new note like this, that we can't actually see them. So we only want these buttons to be shown when they should actually be there. So we're going to add some new CSS now to actually make this change work for these buttons, but also to change the display of our sidebar a little bit as well. So let's go back to our new tab.html, scroll up to our CSS, and underneath this placeholder part of the CSS here, we're going to add some new items. So the first one is for our ULs. This is where we list all the different notes that we have on the page. So we're going to remove all the padding and all the margins, and we're going to remove the list style type to be none, so that removes the bullet point on the corner. Next, we want to set the styling for our new note button, and also the list elements, so basically all of our different notes. So we're going to add a padding top in here of 5 pixels, and a padding bottom. We want the cursor to be a pointer, and a padding left of 5 pixels as well. So let's just save that and have a look. So there we go, it starts to organize it a bit better over there. And then we want to add a hover event so that these look more clickable. So we're going to do the exact same thing. So new note, hover, UL li active, and UL li hover. And then all we're going to say is background color. We use an RGBA like this. So it's a RGB, so the color we want to use is black there, and then we're going to set the alpha, so the opacity, to be 0.5. So if we hover this now, we should see, yeah, we have this little effect. Okay, so now we want to add the styling for our save and delete buttons we just made. So we'll go down a little bit more as well. First we want to say delete page. We're going to set a margin right of 15 pixels because that's going to be on the right hand side of the screen. And then for both our save page and delete page, we want to set some styling. So we want to float them both to the right. We're going to set padding of 10 and 20 pixels on the left and on the top. We're going to set a background color of transparent, a border radius of 3 pixels, and we want to set our border to be 2 pixels and solid. Almost done. We're going to set a color of white, and we're going to make the font weight bold. Okay, so let's just have a look at that now. So you can see over here, let's just change it to dark mode to see how it appears on there. So all we need to do that is go up to our body over here and just put a class of dark just whilst we're working on this. So we can see there's our buttons over there. And again, if you want to change the design of any of these parts, feel free. This is just an example bit of styling to get us started. And then we just want to set a hover effect on both of these buttons as well. So to do that, we're just going to put hover, and then we're going to say background white, color black. So you can just see a little bit of styling there when we hover across. Okay, so that's almost all the CSS. We just have a couple more parts to add. So we're going to add our hidden class, which is just going to say display none. And then we're going to adjust our post body just to add a bit of, so it fills up the area on the page there. So we're going to say min height 100 pixels and width 100%. So if we refresh this now, these buttons should disappear, and our input field, if we just check, hang on, I used the wrong class name there. So make sure this is post dash body. So the reason we're adding this is, I don't know if you saw just there when I tried to click into it, when there's no text inside this box, it's quite small and difficult to select. So you want to make sure that users have a nice area they can click onto, so it will still open up and work with this box. So as you can see now, this area is much easier to click on. Yeah, so we've set that sort of size so far. It has a good clickable area. Okay, so that's all the styling so far that we need. So let's go in and start working on our JavaScript. And as you can see here, this is the code we have so far. So we have our fetch notes function, then we're listening for clicks. We're starting our fetch notes function just here. So this is where we initialize the actual display of our notes. And then we have our functions here for clear note and change page. So that's what we need to work on next. So the change page function will actually, when we click on our note over here, we need to update the title, the icon, and the body with our actual note information. So let's work on that now. The first thing we need to do is grab the actual data for our note. So what we're going to use is we're going to set an object just here, and this is going to find the data for our note from the window object we made up here. So we're going to say window notes, and then get the note ID. So if we do console log object and click the button again now, so we just inspect element, click our note, we can see here is the data for our note just here. So that's what we're going to be using. So we're going to go across now and update our page. So this is just going to be a list of query selectors and then update the HTML or the inner HTML of these elements. So we're going to start by saying document query selector, and then we're going to say holder icon inner text equals object.icon. So we'll just test this first one, and then I'll type out the rest. So if we click onto this, you can see it's updating our icon up the top there. So the next one is our header, so our H1. and that would just be object title. And then the next part is the data set of our title. So again, that'll be h1. This is where we're going to put in the note ID so we can use this for saving and deleting later on. So we just update that by saying dataset note ID, and I'll show you where this goes as well. So that would just be note ID. So we'll just have a look at where that goes. So if we see up here where we have our H1, this is what it looks like at the minute. And if we click onto our first note, it updates the title here, but you can also see we have our data note ID information here as well. So we can access this and work out what note we're working on. And then all we need to do next is update the post body. Like that. We're going to set the inner HTML this time because users could have bolded some parts or put italics, and we need to make sure that we pass in all the HTML that they've saved here. So for that, we're just going to say object body. So if we refresh our page now and click on our note, we can see we have all the information just here. And if we were to change this in our database, say we make this one bold, for example, and then go back to our page and click refresh, you can see it's updated and got this bold display here. So that is our notes appearing on the side of the page. But there's a couple more things we need to add to our change page function. So if we just go back to it, we can see just down here, what we need to do next is update the status of our note to show which one is active, so that we can make it have this hovered display like this. So first, before we just apply that styling, we need to make sure we go through all of our notes and remove any existing styling. So we're going to loop through them all like this. So we're going to make a variable of all of our list items. We're going to say document query selector all, and we're going to say ul li like that. So we've grabbed all of our notes, and then we just do a simple for loop. Also inside of our for loop, we're going to add a try block just in case there's any errors. We don't want this to break our function. Just put a catch e, we can always log this later. So inside here we want to say li's and then get our active one, and we're going to say class list remove active. So that's basically looping through all of our list items and removing this active class. And then underneath this, we're just going to set our current one to have this class. Okay, so this is what we're doing here. To select this item, we're going to again use our list items here, and then we're just going to access the active one by using the data set again, so the data set we used a minute ago, but this time for our actual list items, and then use note ID, and then pass through our variable just here, so that will access this item. Then we say class name equals active. Just be sure to put a capital N just there. So we're almost done with this function. Let's just check that this works. So if we click onto this now, we can see it adds this styling just here. So that's great. But then underneath here, we want to make sure that we're showing the delete button now and the save button. So if we go document query selector again, so we want to save page and delete page, we're just going to say style display is block, and we put that on both. And then finally, we just want to set into our local storage the active item so that when we open our new tab again, it remembers the note that we were last viewing. So we do this by just saying local storage set item, and then for this we've said notes last open page, then we just pass in note ID. That will also stop this error message we have just here where it says can't read the property click of null, where it's looking up to see have we got any items saved from our last view at the minute. So if we refresh this now, click onto this, then refresh again. Did I save this? No. That will help. So if we go back here, click onto this item, then refresh our page. As you can see up here, the reason this isn't working is because up here in our listen for clicks, or is it down here, we're saying date, not data. So if we fix that and save it, that'll fix this issue we had just there. So if we refresh now, we can see that it's pre-selecting this one here. So it remembers which one's been selected. So that is everything we need to add for our change page function. So the next thing we need to do is create our clear note function, which is basically for when we want to click on the new note button just here. So before we do that, we're going to go just before we have our listen for clicks function and just make some space. And we're going to set some click events. So the first event we're going to add is for this new note thing here. So we're going to say document query selector, new note, and then add event listener on click. Okay, so in here, all we're going to call is clear note. So we want to make sure that these events as well are only called once per page. So we don't want to have any multiple clicks happening here when we're trying to click it once. So if we scroll up here and just add a console log again, and then if we refresh our page, just need to fix this here to add a dot just here. So if we click onto our new note now, we should see that it's saying clear note. So what this basically needs to do is clear out our icon. So we'll take it back to the default icon, clear out our title, clear out our body, and then we can make sure that we have our delete and save buttons added again. So if they've only just opened the page, we need this to be added on there as well, but so it's save rather than delete. So you can only save a new note. Okay, so in Atom, we're going to add our new note function now. So this event listener will call clear note. So up here we have the start of our clear note function just here. So we're going to remove this console log first and replace it with the data we said a moment ago. So the first we need to do is remove the delete button. So we do that by saying query selector, delete page, style display is none. So that will remove the delete button first. And then we want to set our new title, our new post body, our new icon back to the default one, and then to update the note ID, so the dataset part we mentioned a moment ago. So what we need to do here is completely remove that attribute from the H1, so that when we go to save it, if we find that the data of the note ID is empty, then we can generate a new one when we submit this to Firebase. So Firebase can make sure that this is a completely unique ID. So all we need to do here is just remove that attribute. So let's start by getting rid of the title. So that is the H1, just make sure you have a dot there before holder. So then all we need to do is say inner text is empty. And then we're just going to copy this a couple of times. So we're going to next grab the post body and set that inner HTML empty for this one. And then the icon, we want to set that to our default icon. So you can use any emoji you want here that will be your default, like this. And then finally, we're going to remove that note ID that we mentioned a moment ago. So to do that, it's the same as before. So we want to get the H1, and instead of adjusting the inner text, we just say remove attribute data note ID. So let's just double check. Okay, we haven't got this dot here, so it's not acting as a class. Yeah, so make sure you add this dot here so that it's acting as a class, and then save, refresh, new note, and there we go. So let's just make sure that our H1 is updated, so we can see at the minute it's not properly changing here. So what's the problem? It's because we have remove event listener, autofill not working there. There should be remove attribute. So if we save that, refresh, check the console log as we do this, says our note ID, click new note, we can see it's properly removed that. So now we have our new note and our note change, or the change page functions working nicely. So next we need to look at how we can save our notes and add these into the database. So we need to add a new function into our firebase.js to either create a brand new note and give us the new note ID, or to update our existing notes. And then all we need is a delete button, so that our delete button has, or a delete function, so that our delete button can call this and then delete the notes. So next we need to make sure that we have click events for our delete button and our save button, and then as we mentioned, create the functions in our firebase.js file to connect this all up. So let's start by going down here to where we have our event listeners to add one of these for the buttons that we just mentioned. So first we're going to add one for our delete button. So that is delete page, and then we'll just copy all of that and paste it and just change delete page to save page. Okay, so this is going to be the two buttons that will delete and save our content. So what we need to do first, if we're saving our page, let's start with this one, is we need to check and grab all the information as possible from our note. So we need to set a number of variables. So first we want to get the title, then we want to get the body of the post, so the content in there. We also need to get the icon, and then finally we need to get the note ID. So and after we've got all of those, we're going to create a new function at the bottom called save page, and then we'll pass all of this information through. So that'll be ID, title, icon, and the body. So let's start by actually grabbing all of this information. So if we go up to our clear note function just here, we can get the title by doing this. So if we go down here and paste, then the same thing for the post body, we just change that to post body and then change inner text to inner HTML. For the icon, same thing for the icon, we go up here and grab that. There we go. And then exactly the same for ID, just here, we'll grab it like that. There we go. So that's all of the information grabbed, and it's going to get sent to our save page function. So we'll create a function for that down here. And that's where we make all of the checks on this content before we go and send it to the database. So next we need to make sure we have the information for our delete page. Now we don't just want to delete this straight away, we want to make sure that we ask the user, are you sure that you want to delete this? So we do that first by creating a confirm, we call the confirm function on the window. So that's what we'll create next. So we're going to set a new variable in here called confirm, and this will be equal to window confirm, and then in here we put our message. So we'll just say, are you sure you want to delete this note? And then put a question mark there. And then all we need to do to check if they said yes or no is just put an if statement just here and put if confirm. And then if the confirm was true, so if they said yes, then we'll run our code in here. If they cancelled or said no, we won't do anything. So we only move forward if they say yes. And then we're just going to use our Chrome runtime again and send a message to our background page. So the command we're going to be using is delete note, and then we're going to pass in the data of our note ID, so the note that we want to delete. And then what we need to do is make sure we listen for a response from this function. So that's what we have just here. And then we create a callback for this in there. So this is where we'll get the response from our background page that lets us know when this note has been deleted. So once that note has been deleted, we need to do a couple of things. We need to update our sidebar of notes, and we need to sort of refresh the note that we're showing on the page. So to do this is quite simple. We just need to fetch notes again, like that. So that will run the call to the database to fetch all our notes. And then we just need to say clear note. So again, we're removing the current note that's been selected. So that's all we need to do just there. But first, we need to grab the selected note. So up here, as you can see, we're using a variable here called ID. So we need to first set this. So we're going to say ID is false to begin with to make sure that this actually exists. And then we're going to create a little try block just here again to protect ourselves from errors. We're going to say ID equals document query selector holder H1. So again, where the ID is stored. And then we say dataset note ID. So that will grab the note ID from the dataset. Just make sure that's lowercase. And then down here, just want to add a catch just here. And then what we need to do is down here before we run our confirm is just say if ID does not equal false, then we can run the rest of this code. So that just makes sure that we actually have an ID on the page. This isn't an empty note, so to speak. So this is actually something there for it to delete. So later on, we'll create the delete note function in our background page, but now we have our delete function just here, and we have our save event listener. So now we need to create our save page function to make sure that this is all going to work. So we'll just save that for a second and reload our page just to check that everything's working. Okay, so it's all looking good at the minute. So now we're going to go back and work on our save function. So before we save our note, we need to make a couple of checks on the actual information. So first, we're going to make sure that there is a title. So we're going to say if title. So in other words, if the title is empty, we're going to make an alert and say, please enter a title. Really simple. And then we're also going to return false so that we don't continue running the rest of this function. So to test this, we could refresh this, create a new note and try and click save. And you can see here it says, please enter a title. And if we do enter one and press save, we don't get that error message. So that's good. So now we need to make sure that we check if this is a new note or if it's an existing note. So to do that, we're going to say if ID equals undefined. So if it hasn't been set yet, so when we check up here where we fetch our ID, we can see if it's a brand new note, we remove that data attribute from the data set. So it's either going to be the actual ID or undefined. So we're going to add a check in here to see if it is undefined. And if it is, we're going to set our ID here into something that we can make sure we can reference, and we can check this in the back end to make sure we generate one from Firebase. So for now, we'll just give it a random name, something like empty autogen. So remember to auto generate this, something like that. And then in here, if we do have an ID, we can grab all the information and update our window object straight away. So what this is going to do is update the sidebar with any icon or title changes. So we'll just say document, query selector, pages holder. We want to grab the list item. So that'll be data, note ID, then we'll pass in the ID we had. So we know here that the ID exists because it's in this else block. So we just pass that in, then we'll just say inner text equals icon, then we'll add a space. It's probably better to put the icon in a span element or something, but for now this is fine. So we'll just put a space and then put title. So that should update the title here. So we'll just test this. So all it's going to do now is change that title. It's not going to save anything to the database just yet. But if we go back over here, use our existing note and change the icon and the title, and then press save. If we look over in the sidebar, you can see it updates the icon over here. So that's great. We also need to make sure that we are updating the window object as well. So we'll say window notes, put in the note ID, and then set the title, and so on for the icon and post body. Okay, so after we've got underneath this if statement just here, we're going to send all of this information to our background page. So similar to what we did with our delete function, where we made the checks and then pushed it to our background page, we're going to do the same thing here. So we're just going to say Chrome runtime send message, and we're going to set our command. So our command here will be post note, so post note, and then we're going to pass in some data again. But this time we have a little bit more data to pass through. So we're going to create an object just here, and this will have our ID, which will be our ID, title is our title, and then the body is here, and then the icon. So we're passing all of these variables through in an object just here. And then we need to make sure that, again, we listen for a response. So after this second closing bracket just here, we're going to put a comma and then listen for any callbacks in here. So that is how you submit your new note to the database. But once this has been in the database, we need to update our page again. So what we need to do here is inside of the response callback just here, we're going to add some more code. So we're going to put this all in a try block because you never know, there could be a problem with the server and it might change the response. So we'll just put this in here to be sure. So we'll just make sure we catch any errors. But in here, we're first going to set a variable here of object as our response. We're going to update the note ID of the current selected note. So in case we've created a brand new note, we need to make sure that now this has been pushed to the database, that we update that ID. So because it was empty or undefined before, Firebase will generate an ID for us automatically. So now is where we can actually set that hit just here. So we'll just say query selector, holder, h1, make sure to put a dot there because it's a class. And then we're just going to say dataset note ID equals object ID. So we're going to update that. And then we're going to update our local storage as well to make sure that this is now the most recent note that we've looked at. So we'll say local storage set item, so similar to what we did before. And this will be notes last open page, and that'll also be that same ID. So finally, because this is now a saved note, we can show the delete button again. So to do that, we just do document query selector delete page and then style display block. And then after all of this code here, we want to fetch our notes again just to make sure that we've got the most up-to-date notes from the database. So that's similar to what we're doing over here. This is just a slightly more reliable version of it because it could take a little moment for the database to update. So we have this check that we do first and update the sidebar, and then we update it properly afterwards. Over here, so that's still inside this block. So over here we can add a console log in case there's any errors, which can be useful during development. So we'll just put that in there for now. So that is what we have down here. Now we need to make these functions on our background page so that we can actually add this information to our database or delete it from our database. So over here, we're in our firebase.js file. So we've made some space down here. So where we have our message command check here for fetch notes, we need to add another check similar to this for our delete note. So that's what we're going to start with first. So we'll say message command equals delete note. So that's where the code will be for deleting our note, and then we're going to add another check for posting a note. So we'll say if message command equals post note. So that should match up with the commands here and here. So as long as that matches up, we have our areas to push the code through here. So first we're going to work on our delete function. So what we need to do is first grab the note ID that we want to delete. So we'll say we're going to set a variable here of note ID, and this will be equal to message data ID. So again, this is the data just here, so message data, and then it's the ID part of this object. So that's where we get the ID from. And then we'll put this all inside a try block. Again, we want to make sure that we catch any errors. We'll send a response here if there's an error. But inside here, we're going to call our database. So we'll set a variable name here. So we're going to say delete note equals Firebase. And then we call database just here. And then we want to pass in a reference. So we have database and we say ref, and this will be /notes / the note ID that we want to remove. So that will just be note ID just here. We should also make sure in here that this note ID isn't empty. Otherwise that would remove all of our notes from Firebase. So we just want to say if note ID does not equal isn't empty, and then we'll put all of that in here just to be completely sure. But otherwise that'll be our thing just here. Then we want to say remove like that. And then so long as this is successful, we're going to say response. This is where we're using this part of the thing up here. So this will send a response back to our app.js. So we'll pass an object, and we'll say type result. You can change the format of this if you want, just to be sure that you have a success and an ID here. That's all we really need. So we'll say result, and then status success, and then we're passing our ID. Says our note ID, and then we'll put the actual request here as well, so the whole message object, in case that's useful for debugging. But otherwise that will send the response just there. And then if there was an error, what we're going to do is we're going to change this to error, and then we'll change this here from ID to data, and then put the error just there. And we'll also log it to the console so we can look in the background page.html in the extensions page on Chrome. So we'll just say error and then pass that in just there. So that's our delete note function working. So we'll test this in a moment, but we'll just first get our save note function created as well so we can test them together. So in this area down here, we have our post note. This is we're going to add this code. So first, we're going to grab all of the parts of the data object that we pass through. So we're going to set all of these variables again, just to make it easier and clear of what we're actually accessing at each parts of this. So we'll set our title, which will be message data title. I'll code all of these out and then come back to you. Okay, so that's them all typed out. Again, we're going to put a try block here to catch any errors. So inside this code here, we're going to check for the empty ID check we made earlier. So we'll say if note ID equals, and then we'll just double check what this was. So down here, we called it empty autogen. So we'll copy that and paste that in here. So if the note is empty, we need to make sure that Firebase is going to generate a new ID for us. So we do that by saying, we're setting a variable just here called new note. And this will be equal to Firebase database. And then we pass through the reference here. First, we need to make sure that we're not using that autogen. So down here is where we generate it automatically, just to keep things straightforward. So in here, we can pass through our actual note ID. So it'll be / notes, and then we put the note ID again. So note ID, like this. And then we just say update, and then pass in object of our information. So its title is here, icon here, and body, like that. So that should mean that that all worked, and then we'll actually pass in a response again. So exactly the same as what we did for our delete function. We want to say type is result, status, success. We'll pass our ID again so we can use this where we need it. So that'd be note ID. And then we'll pass in the request as well, message. So then in the else block down here, that's where we know that we haven't set our ID yet. So I almost was going ahead of myself a little bit there. So here we need to make sure that we get a new key generated. So that's going to be our first variable here will be new post key, and that'll be Firebase database ref. So we have this empty this time, and then we just say child of notes. So it knows that that's where we want to add this note into, is the notes child of our database. And then we just say push key. So it gives us a new random unique key here. And then we can do the same thing we did before. So new post or new note in here. So that'd be Firebase database ref. And then we do / notes, and then / our new post key just here. And then because this is a brand new note, instead of saying update, we're going to say set. And then we do exactly the same thing by passing through that object again. So that'd be title. It's title, icon. So that's everything just there. And then we're going to set a console log here for debugging. That will just be our new note ID, like that. And then we'll set a response. So exactly the same as up here, except when we passed in our ID just here, we're going to use our new post key rather than the note ID. Otherwise that'll be passing back that empty autogen function just here. So that's almost everything. We just need to make sure we pass in a response for the error. So we'll just copy this here. We'll say status error, and then exactly the same as what we did before. We'll change this from ID to data, and this to our error just here. So we'll just grab the console log we used up here and put that there just to keep it all consistent. So that should be the create and delete part. So let's just go and test this now. So we'll first go to our Chrome extension settings page, and just make sure we refresh this so it's got the brand new code. So we've gone to our extensions page here. Here's the new tab notes extension, and we're going to click refresh. So that should all be up to date. So now we're going to go in here, click on new note, and we're going to just call it new note test. Set a new icon, add some content down here, and then we're just going to say save. And we can see our note's been added over here. And if we check the console, we can see that we have our new randomly generated ID up here of our new note. And then if we go in the side over here, we can see we can switch between these two. And if we go to this new note test and delete it and say yes, we can see it's been removed from the sidebar as well and from the database. So that is how you can create a really simple but really powerful extension for your new tab using Firebase and a Chrome extension. And you can create this new tab extension that will have your notes that's inspired by Notion. Thanks again for watching the video. If you found this useful, please feel free to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I'm planning on adding a few more longer form courses like this and some challenges coming up in the next few weeks to see if we can build 5 Chrome extensions in 5 hours. So I'll be adding this video before the new year. Thanks for watching.